Hello everyone, welcome to another monthly Patreon voted review. This month's selection is Gradius V, a legendary game that I've been very excited to talk about for a long time. But before we get into the Gradius V review, I want to do a quick mention that next week I'm going to do the t-shirt sales of the Electric Underground, and I would really appreciate it if you're a fan of the channel and you're so inclined if you picked one up, because I'm sending this direct to consumer. It's not going through a third party or anything like that. And so it's kind of like a one-time deal for the year. Then probably maybe in the winter or next year I'll do another sort of go at it, because I can't do this year round, obviously. So I really would appreciate it. YouTube is basically paying me nothing right now, and so it would go a long ways to supporting the channel, especially since it gets a little bit expensive with all the games I have to review, and I don't necessarily get review codes in the mail, and I have turned down all the sponsorship stuff, so I do appreciate that. And so with that said, Gradius V, the ultimate shmup. When I say ultimate, I don't mean that in the 90s sense of being super wonderful, amazing, wow. I mean ultimate in the traditional sense of the final, of the climax, of the summation of everything that came before it. Gradius V definitely fits that billing. To me, it feels like the end of an era. It's the final hurrah for these legendary studios. Both Treasure, it is their final shmup, at least formal shmup, and then it is the last in the Gradius series as well, and G-Rev was involved. So it just feels like everything came together one last time. It's like a movie. You know, all the old agents come together for one last mission. That's really the vibe of this game, and it really shows that the developers are giving this game everything they had. Nothing was held back, at least from my observation. And what's really cool about Gradius V is it's one of those very, very special and rare crossovers, where in a lot of people's minds, when you think of crossover games, you think of your favorite studios, and they're going to do a crossover. Everyone gets so excited because it's going to be peanut butter and jelly, or peanut butter and chocolate. It's going to be just this nice, delicious blend of all the elements we want together, like Cave and Toho. We're going to get the best of Cave, we're going to get the best of Toho. They're going to come together, and it's going to be the ultimate climax of everything that we love. Same thing with Rising with a bar, right? We get Rising, we have Cave, we're coming together. Battle Garega meets Donanpachi. It's going to be the best shmup of either studio. Well, as history shows, that is rarely the case. Usually what happens with these collaborative studio crossovers is one studio has much more influence. One style of design is much more prominent. The elements don't always mash up in that perfect dream mega mix. But I have to say, Gradius V is an exception to that rule. Gradius V is literally incarnate. If you took a Treasure game and you shoved it into Gradius, bam, you get Gradius V. It's like the perfect blend of both of the styles. And so a lot of this review will be talking about the styles getting blended, because as great of a shmup as it is, and as cool as it is being a member of the Gradius series and being developed by Treasure, I think the combination of the elements is what impresses me the most. So right off the bat, let's talk about what this game is like compared to Treasure and compared to traditional Gradius games. So on the surface, it would seem like most reviewers, I think, they would look at this game and they'd say, this is more on the Gradius side of things, because the exterior coating is definitely more Gradius, right? You have the Vic Viper, or whatever the ship is. It's kind of like the Vic Viper. The Vic Viper's in the game, and it looks exactly like your ship, so close enough. You've got the upgrade system. You've got the same sort of weapons. It's a horizontal scrolling shmup like Gradius. You know, so everything is kind of sounding like this is a Gradius game. But then you start playing, and then you look at the level design, the boss design, the enemy pattern. By damn, this is a Treasure game. It's really cool how these came together. So it's hard to know where to begin exactly, but let's start with the basics of what you're going to get with Gradius V. So like I said, it's an entry into the Gradius series. You have all the staples. I'm actually pretty familiar with Gradius. This is one of these old school series that I am much more familiar with. And you have a lot of the staples, the power-up system. No semi-auto, I did notice that. It's all manual. You have the power-ups that you get, but there are some Treasure amendments to this style. First of all, there is the infamous Gradius syndrome, where when you're playing old school Gradius games, when you're fully powered up, when you're cruising through those stages, you feel like a goddamn beast. You're just destroying everything in your way. Your ship is so powerful. That is why I think Gradius is such a great old school shmup, because it's one of those few old school shmups. When you get fully powered, you feel like a god on the screen. You're just destroying everything. Nothing can stand up against you. But then you die and you lose everything, and it's a complete goddamn nightmare. And then there's a checkpoint system that you get sent back to. Then you have to battle through these horrific checkpoints. You're moving the speed of a turtle. The Vic Viper is slim, but it's kind of long, and so you're really vulnerable from the ceiling and the floor. And a lot of Gradius level design is all about things shooting at you from the ceiling and the floor. This game keeps a lot of that. But Treasure have stepped in and said, all right, Gradius, okay, that's all well and good, but let's smooth this out a little bit. So now when you die in Gradius 5, yes, you lose your power-ups, but you can still pick up those options. It kind of reminds me of Salamander a little bit in that regard. You can still pick up your options, and that's huge. So you're not completely naked. You're not sent back to a checkpoint. There is a checkpoint option in the options menu, but who turns that on, right? So you're not sent back to a checkpoint. You have a very generous and beautiful invulnerability window too. I think that's something to be aware of, because when you first start playing Gradius 5 and you die and then you go to recover, you think, oh, you know, my stupid options are in the wall, and I'm gonna die trying to get them. But the game gives you this massive invulnerability window, because Treasure knew, okay, you need to get your stupid options out of the wall. So you have a lot of time to get back your options and collect them. And so unless you get in some really dicey scenarios, you're normally able to get your options back. It can be a bit of a tricky battle to get on stage positioning again, but at least you're not worrying about dying while you're respawning, which is a problem with a lot of these older school shmup. So modern touch there, modern touch to the level design as far as the continuation system. But now let's talk about where it deviates from Gradius a lot, and that is the level design and the boss patterns. And it's like this cool little mixture of the two that Treasure is very famous for being able to put together. For example, with the levels, you do have a lot of Gradius staples, like you have the lines of enemies coming in, you shoot them all, you get a power-up. You've got, like I said before, you got the enemies in the ceiling and the floor. Gradius is all about fighting enemies above and below you and all around you. It has some nice little Treasure touches that go a long way to separate it from the other games in the series, in my opinion. First of all, the Vic Viper is damn near like Rico from Mushihime-sama. It's got this tiny, tiny little hitbox on the Vic Viper, which I appreciate. So it's straight up bullet hell with the hitbox size. It is absolutely slim. You can slide through all kinds of crazy patterns and scenarios. It feels like you're playing a bullet hell in a lot of occasions. You get a lot of crap on screen and you can just slip right through them. It has a lot of environmental hazards and design that is absolutely Treasure. I'm thinking of stuff like in Radiant Silvergun, where you have like just things hanging out in the middle of the stage. You have to go around, gates opening, all that sort of stuff. That's not typical in the older Gradius games. They're much more straightforward. But in this game, you've got a lot of straight up environmental design that definitely feels like you're playing Ikaruga or Radiant Silvergun. And so you're dealing with the stage, I feel like, a lot more in this game. And it comes down to a lot of memorization as far as what's going to happen in the stage. Like, for example, there's a part where this bay door closes and you're supposed to slip that Vic Viper through. But the game doesn't give you a whole lot of warning or time. It's just like, all right, get through here. And if you don't, you just have to die, basically. And there's a lot of situations like that in the game where usually in a cave game or in most vertical shmups, there's always an out, one way or another. If you have a bomb or something, you can always get through. But there's a lot of situations in Gradius 5 with the level design where you're kind of just checkmated. The game's like, sorry, you missed your window, and you're just kind of sitting there waiting for death to come to you, and you have no way to stop it. That is pretty unusual, and Treasure has some moments like that in their game, so I felt like that was much more of a Treasure thing. Another thing about Gradius 5 that definitely stands out as far as level design is the length of the damn game and the damn stages. There is a review of Ikaruga by IGN that I really like to make fun of. I have this whole video about how Ikaruga is not a puzzle game, and I make fun of a bunch of Ikaruga reviews in that video. But one of them that always makes me laugh was this IGN review of Ikaruga, and they were saying, oh, we love the game, but we wish it was twice as long. Like, that's the most insane bit of shmup criticism I've ever heard. But apparently maybe Treasure read that review, because they're like, Gradius 5, let's double the game length. And so compared to Ikaruga and compared to Radiant Silvergun, good God, this game is so long. It goes on for straight up an hour almost, run times. One run through when you know what you're doing. And then the boss fights. So if you don't know what you're doing in these boss fights, they go on forever. These are not Gradius style boss fights, especially old school Gradius, where it's literally like you just sit in the middle of the screen, you find the save spot, and you just kill the boss. Or the bosses take like 3 seconds to mow down with laser. No. These are treasure boss fights. They're super intricate, all these crazy patterns. And then if you wait too long, you get these nasty timeout patterns at the end. Tank so many hits. Then if you get killed during the fight, even if you're powered down with your options, it's just absolutely brutal. And the boss fights are much more engaging and interesting than old school Gradius boss fights. Definitely some treasure touches along there. This is a long haul, and I kind of wonder why the game is so long, because it feels a little bit excessive in my opinion, and this is just my opinion as someone who tends to like 30 to 40 minute shmups, but it does feel like this game is a little long in the tooth and some stages could have been cut out. But my suspicion is that, like I said, this is the ultimate shmup, and so maybe the team thought, all right, this is it. Just throw everything in there. There's not going to be a Gradius 6. That's not going to happen. So everything we want to do must occur in Gradius 5. So they just made the game absolutely giant as a way to get those ideas in there, I'm thinking. But there's some stages in the game that I'm not a huge fan of. Like there's a salamander stage in the game with the whole, you have to shoot into the skin of whatever membrane and fly through it. Not a huge fan of that. Then there's this one stage with all this poisonous gas. And I feel like that was one of the most poorly designed elements of the game. It reminds me of R-Type Final 2 a little bit, where some of those enemy hitboxes are just like mist. So it's like, where's the hitbox on the mist, right? So there's some elements of the game that I think could have been more polished. Speaking of R-Type Final 2, I don't think there's any comparison in terms of quality. I know they're in different series, but visually what's funny is when you look at R-Type Final 2 visually, then you look at Gradius 5 visually, it's like, you know, Gradius 5 is literally on the PlayStation 2, and R-Type Final 2 is on modern consoles using Unreal Engine 4. And in my opinion, Gradius 5 looks a lot better. The visual design is just much more polished and well done. Everything blends nicely. The background work is insane. Yeah, they went all out. Treasure did not hold back in terms of the visuals. I still prefer, honestly, Radiant Silvergun's visuals over Gradius 5. I think it's one of the best looking 2D to 3D series transitions of shmups I've seen. I think it's a lot better than the R-Type 3D games. Treasure have a lot of experience with 3D work, and honestly kind of breaks my heart a little bit playing this game, because you can see the potential the studio had going forward. It's just too bad the genre stalled out underneath them. But speaking of the console and the potential, I do want to have a discussion a bit about the fact that this is not an arcade game. This is a console-only shmup. And I think that is a very interesting development because, again, part of it, I think, influenced this game design, because there's no way they're putting Gradius 5 as is in an arcade cabinet. It's just way too long. The game also loops, too. So imagine some super player, you own an arcade, you have Gradius 5 in there, some super player shows up and is like looping this game for 4 hours or whatever. There are aspects of the game and the design that definitely reflect the console as far as kind of the length of it. There's unskippable cutscenes, which I'm not a fan of. I get it, but no. Skip the cutscenes for the love of God. The first time you play it, it's like, oh, that's cool. The 8th time you play it and you have to sit through that stage 2 cutscene, I think that was a big mistake. Someone should mod it to have a cutscene skip or something. But that being said, I know a lot of people are wondering, how do you play Gradius 5? What is the best way to play it? Because PS2 emulation is pretty garbage in my opinion. Even if it sort of runs technically okay at times, the input lag right now is absurd. Jaimer even mentions it because I think he played the PS2 emulator for his run on his channel, and he mentioned the input lag was insane. I've never been able to get the PS2 input lag down further either, using all the different emulators, all the different configurations, doing all these things. it's always very hefty and pretty unplayable in my opinion, outside of maybe doing some save state practice. And then there's the question of, well, okay, is the PlayStation 3? And a lot of people in the comment section will probably weigh in and say, oh, I have a backwards compatible PS3, which I have, so that's a good way to go, right? In my opinion, I would say no. This is coming from someone who spent $500 when I didn't have $500 to spend on a backwards compatible PS3, fully backwards compatible, so I can stick a PS2 disc in this bad boy and it'll run it. And the issue with even the fully backwards compatible PS3 is that it adds a frame of lag. And that may not seem like a huge deal. In my opinion, that extra frame of lag takes the game from feeling crisp and fun on the PS2 to feeling a little bit sticky and awkward on the PS3. I don't recommend playing PS2 games on the PS3, unfortunately, as awesome as it is to have the backwards compatible console. So that leaves us with the final and most obvious solution, which is playing it on the PlayStation 2 itself. Modding on the PS2 is pretty absurd right now. It is very, very good. So personally, I have like 4 PS2s that are modded, and so I have all kinds of fun stuff I can play on those. I would say just get your hands on a PS2, mod it with freemcboot, fire it up, and just play some Gradius V that way. I do think it is the best way to play the game. And I feel like Treasure did a pretty good job as far as features with the game. They went all out. So let's talk about the features of this game, because there's some important stuff you need to know. There is a stage select system, but you need to beat the levels in order to unlock the stage select. Here's a handy hint. You can go into the options menu and you can change the difficulty, you can change the extend settings, and you can change the amount of extends you get. So I went in there and I ramped that up to like max extends, lowest extend settings. I left it on normal because I wanted to keep the gameplay feeling more authentic, but you could drop that down and mess around with the difficulty select and everything like that. So that's very cool. So you can unlock the stages for stage select. The next thing you need to know is that when you go into the stage select, it has actual checkpoints in the stages, because the stages are so damn long that even I think Treasure was thinking, okay, we need to put some checkpoints in this, because it's going to take you 5 minutes or however long to get to the boss if you want to practice the boss. So that's a very cool system, and I think it's a system more shmup stage selects should adapt. Don't just put level select, have level select, mid-level maybe, even 2/3 maybe, and then boss. Make sure the boss is in there. So that's very cool, but when you first fire it up and you play it, there's a big issue that presents itself to you, which is, okay, I want to practice the stage 5 boss. I go in there, I fire up the boss checkpoint in stage 5, I have no power-ups. I'm gonna get straight up owned in this boss select, and isn't that broken, isn't that useless? When I first ran into this, I thought, Treasure are absolute idiots. How did they overlook this thing? Because they have a mode where you can select your weapons, but they never added a mode to select your power-ups and everything for the stage select. Isn't that absurd? But Treasure being Treasure, there is a way. It's just awkward and strange. There is a cheat code that you can use. So you go into stage select, you hit start, you press up, up, down, down, left, right, either L1 and R1 or L2 and R2. They do different things, and you can double check this on Game Facts or whatever. By damn, that code is absolutely necessary to know, because you need to know it so you can practice things, because that powers you up. So you need to use the power up code in order to practice the stages and all that sort of stuff. So keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are unlockables in this game. So after you beat the game, you can unlock weapon edit and you can unlock free play mode. Both very useful. The thing about weapon edit is that not only does it have it so you can customize and mix and match the weapons, but there are just straight up weapons in weapon edit that aren't in the original weapon selection. Like you can get a flamethrower, you can get the ripple. Yeah, there's just a ton of them, right? I was watching Jaimer's replay on this and really taking notes on his replay. And he sort of mentioned there's the ideal setup for the weapon system, and I think he's right, because I tried a bunch of weapon combinations, and I think there is a really good set of weapon to select, and so I'll give that to you. So you have this spread bomb, then you have the fully vertical double attack, so it goes straight and then it goes up above you, and then you have the ripple laser. That damn ripple laser is really good, because not only does it do a lot of damage, but it's massive. And so you get all the options going with the ripple laser. You get a ton of screen coverage. Makes a lot of sections and a lot of boss fights much easier. Then you actually go with the default shield. Oh, and then freeze formation. Don't forget that. Freeze is really, really good. And I think this ability to freeze your options separates the game a lot from other Gradius games that I've played, at least the older ones. Maybe the later ones have a freeze option, I don't know. But being able to freeze and manually place your options on the screen, that opens up a lot of strategies, and you use it almost all the time. You can use it on boss fights, you can use it on the stages, you're just constantly being able to manipulate those options and put them in places they shouldn't really go. And it goes a long way and makes the boss fights especially much easier because you can do all kinds of crazy point blank strategies. But even with the stages, it's just really handy and useful. And it adds a sort of art outside of just controlling your ship, being able to freeze and control those options. Reminds me a little bit actually of Death Smiles, because there's so much option management in Death Smiles. So that's what I'm saying, is that even though on paper the game looks like a Gradius game, once you start playing it, it feels like, oh, this is Gradius, but there is a lot of treasure going on right now. There's a lot of bullet hell type elements happening. It's not just your classic old school horizontal shooter or anything like that. So I think if you're a fan of old school shmups, this will hit for you. If you're a fan of bullet hells, this will also hit for you. I've actually never met anyone who doesn't like Gradius 5. I'm not kidding. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it is something that you have to check out because it's just such a magical moment in the genre that I really wish we saw more from in the future, whether it was another collaboration or maybe Konami kind of took the ideas of Gradius 5 and just built on them for Gradius 6, or Treasure took some ideas from Gradius 5 and put it in a new shmup or something. You know, it's a real shame that this is kind of where it all ends for these studios, at least in terms of shmupping, of course. A few final notes. The soundtrack, I talked about the soundtrack a little bit on Discord. I think when you're in the game and when you're cooking and there's all the sound effects going on, you get the cool voice acting, it's got a real cinematic vibe. Of course it does. Treasure has cinematic shmups and they're the cream of the crop in that regard. Soundtrack wise, it's very fun in the game. It sounds great, it works, it mixes well. But I personally don't really like the soundtrack outside of the game as much as other shmup soundtracks. For example, when I was doing the Rayforce review, I sat and listened to that Rayforce soundtrack like 5 times just for the hell of it because it was so good. Whereas Gradius feels a little bit more modern in its style of soundtrack. Old school style shmup soundtracks, they're like just jamming songs that you can jam out to whether or not you're playing the game. But more modern style games, you know, they go for an atmospheric, more minimal soundtrack so you can get a better mix with the sound effects, I'm assuming. And that's kind of how it feels with Gradius 5 in my opinion. You get it's cool soundtrack, but it's not as rockin' and as awesome as stuff like Under Defeat or Border Down or, you know, those G-Rev soundtracks. So I think it's solid, but I don't think it's one of the better soundtracks. Though Gradius, in my opinion, Gradius series has okay music. But then one last note about this game is that this shmup is very difficult, at least in my opinion. I have not had my ass kicked as hard by a shmup in a very long time. This is one of those reviews where you're going to see a lot of selective editing on my part because I've played this game for 3 days and I was nowhere near getting the clear. Whereas most shmups after about 3 days of play either get the clear, like Andro Dunos, or I'm very close. This one I was like, no goddamn way am I getting this clear anytime soon. Not only because the game is so damn long, but these end stages are brutal. They are ruthless. Just a word of warning, this is not a walk in the park. Damn, it is a lot of fun. And you will be playing those first 3 stages over and over and over just to get used to those, let alone the later stages with all the crazy patterns. And of course, it's a recommend. It's a stone cold classic. Go buy yourself a PS2 to play it, in my opinion. Playing it on emulator is not a fun time. So I hope you all enjoyed this review. Please like, subscribe, tell all your friends. Please check out the shirts next week. It will help me out a lot. And there's also the Electric Underground Reddit. I post all my videos on there, and that's a cool place to hang out if you're interested in that. Adios, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100 Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Anthony Iodice, Aaron Solis, Asa Davis, Ben, Borgie22, Brian Shiver, Chris Yusufovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Cook Some Soup, Corey Mark, Des Audio, Darkwing, Darren Griffin, Delta Tango 6, Disco Star Slayer, DJ 420 Praise It, Eric H, FCK Full Set, Retro Schmupper Housu, Kiwi, J Lab, JB RPG, Jim Knockham, Joe Angelo, John Kelly, Jolts, Game Boy Guru, K, K2, Kikuman 589, Large, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Megadeth 859, Minung, Mechalin, Michael Stern, Mitch LY, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Oakla Kugels, Philip Mason, Plasmo, Portal 63, Rattlecat, Raoul, Real Skeen, Riff Mason, Rolf, Scanline City, 7 Overdose, Shane Sintiansky, Shmup Junkie, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Benster, TRM, Sugumo, Twilight, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.